The topic for the today's webinar is statutory bank branch audit. And we have with us CA Dhananjay Gokhale to take us through major changes in LFAR, NPA norms, couple of RBI circulars, etc. I thank you, CA Dhananjay Gokhale, for accepting our invitation for sharing his vast experience and knowledge in the subject. He opted to contribute to CABA fund. Actually, generally we used to we dispatch all the memento to the speakers after the webinar. He opted for the CABA fund, so we will contribute on his behalf to the ICAI. Thank you, Dhananjay. I also take this opportunity to thank Central Council members C.A. Srinivas Joshi for structuring the two-day seminars on bank branch audit. Tomorrow is the panel discussion on the issues in bank branch audit. I now request core group member C.A. Jayesh Thakkar to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, Seema Madam. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to introduce our today's speaker, C.A. Dhananjay Gokhale sir. To introduce our today's speaker, the list is very long, but to introduce him in a very brief, I would say C.A. Dhananjay Gokhale sir. He is the Bachelor of Commerce from the University of Mumbai. He is the fellow member of our Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, and he is into the practice since almost 2.5 decades. So we can see the long journey he had and experience he had. He's also the founder partner of the firm Dhananjay J. Gokhale and Company Chartered Accountants, and is specialized in the management consultancy on auditing and assurance services with respect to corporate and banking sectors. He is also the co-opted member of Auditing and Assurance Standard Board of ICAI for the year 1819, and he also the nominated as a subgroup member of the Banking, Insurance and Pension Committee of WRC of ICAI for the year 1819. He was also the convener of the study group formed by the ICAI Guidance Note on the Audit of Banks 2019 edition. He is a member of the expert panel constituted by the Auditing and Assurance.
Hello, Jayesh.
ICAI magazines, ICAI Guidance Note on the Auditing of Bank of 2016 to 2021, Manual on the Concurrent Audit of Banks, reference material published by the WRC on Statutory Bank Audit. He has handled various assignments related to the bank audit, including the statutory central bank audit of PSBs and merger and acquisitions of the urban cooperative banks. And he is also consultant on the board of various banks. He is a regular speaker at various seminars on the standards on auditing and the bank audit across the various regions and the branches of the ICAI. He had been the visiting faculty at the University of Mumbai too. So with this brief introduction, I would now invite our today's speaker, C.A. Dhananjay Gokhale sir, to share his views on today's topic, statutory bank audit plan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jayesh, and thank you, Seema, for inviting me to Zebi Nagar Study Circle. And of course, thanks to Krishna Kumarji also. Myself and Seema knows since too long, actually. So
Yes.
that's why I can address her as Seema. I need not have to be too formal with her.
No problem.
And I had been invited to Zebi Nagar Study Circle a couple of times earlier year also, but somehow the dates were not matching. So finally, I could make it up to address at the Zebi Nagar Study Circle. So thanks once again for that. And as far as today's topic is concerned, even though IRAC norms have been there since long, this has been one of the very crucial part of bank branch audit. Even for central statutory auditor, it has been always a critical part. So is the case with bankers also, that for banks also the IRAC norms have been very critical and crucial. So we'll be focusing more on the recent circulars, and as far as the regular IRAC norms are concerned, initially we will have a kind of a refresher of those guidelines. Even though they have been there since long, as I said, there are still always certain litigations and issues which keep on cropping up at the audit places. So I will try to give as much as examples as possible rather than be too technical on what is IRAC norms, because I'm sure that most of the participants are aware about the bank audit. So I will take a little further, beyond that. And throughout the session, at any point of time, if anyone is having any query, they can post it in the chat box window. I'm keeping chat box window open so that we can have a discussion about the query at the same page. In the sense, whenever I'm at a particular topic, you can post the queries. In case if I miss out any queries, Jayesh is there to see that all queries are getting addressed. So remaining queries we can take it at the end. But what I will request the participant is to post the queries there and there itself, so that it can be more interactive rather than a monologue wherein I'm speaking for 2 hours and you also need some break in between that, so that you can post certain queries. This is the overall coverage which I intend to do. So initially we'll talk a little about introductory part on what is NPA and which are the IRAC norms which are there. Then we have some exceptions and clarifications which RBI has given in the IRAC master circular. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll talk about the relief, one-time relief measure to MSME borrowers which RBI has given. The relevant relief is by way of circular of 6 August 2020. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll talk in detail about COVID-19 related circulars in series that started with 27 March circular. It was followed by 17th April circular. Then there was 23rd May circular, and subsequent to that, there is a 6th August circular which has got issued. So we'll talk at length about that. Projects under implementation, even though the slide is having a elaborative guideline about that, we'll just talk in brief about that, just to understand the concept of projects under implementation. Then we'll talk about the provisioning and income recognition norms which are there as far as different variety of asset classification is concerned. And we'll touch upon restructuring of advances with some brief about 7 June 2019 circular. June 19 circular basically is applicable as of now only to those advances account which are having exposure of more than 1,500 crores. So we may not really go deeper into that, but at least we'll look at certain aspect if time permits. And at the end, I have certain important points listed out for you, so we can just discuss about that. And then any questions are left out, we can take up the questions also. Now, these are basic basic circulars of Reserve Bank of India, which one needs to be aware about. That is, first one is the master circular dated July 15, which is the last master circular issued, because there is no further master direction or master circular which has got issued. So this circular has to be handy with you. Then the second one is, in case if your branches are having the agricultural advances, you need to have master direction dated 17th October 2018 with you to understand the relief measures by banks in areas which are affected by natural calamity. Then we have prudential framework for resolution of stress asset circular, which was dated 7 June 2019. And we have MSME one-time relief given to borrower circular, which started from 7th February 2018 circular, which was followed by 8 June 2018 circular. Then it was extended by way of January 19 circular, further extended by 11th February circular, and the last extension is by way of 6th August circular, which we'll talk in detail. These are COVID-19 related RBI circulars which are there. So I just listed down these circulars. We will be talking in detail about that in subsequent slides. So as I said, it started with 17th March circular. The last circular is 6th September 2020 circular. 17th September circular is about the financial parameters which have been stated or which have been published by expert committee, and 13th October is only FAQ, not really a circular, but that is to give a clarity to banks about certain queries which they had raised about 6th August 2020 circular and its applicability and adoptability. So let me first look at the query. I didn't expect a query so quickly, but let me just have a look at that. Regarding the recent Supreme Court interim order, can we put our observations under the emphasis of matter para in our main audit report? This will serve both the purposes of complying with Supreme Court order and also reporting NPAs in branch which we audit. We'll take up this particular query when we are talking or rather discussing about the Supreme Court judgment. I wanted to talk much more than the query which you have stated, but just to quickly answer the query, we can definitely put it in under emphasis of matter para, provided how the bank is adopting that particular judgment. Just to put it precisely, if the bank decides that bank will give an appropriate disclosure about how many such accounts are there which have been not marked as NPA because of Supreme Court judgment. Bank also makes a provision and income recognition norm equivalent to the normal IRAC norms get followed by the bank, then it's fine to put up emphasis of matter para. If not, then we need to think about whether modified report is required or whether other matters para will be required. But we'll talk in detail about that, and very soon the institute guidance note will be also published. So the stand of institute will be also more clear about the adaptability of Supreme Court judgment as far as auditors are concerned. So just park this query for some time. We'll come to that point in detail. Now, firstly, we'll just run through certain basics of IRAC norms, kind of a revision for most of you, maybe some introductory part for few of you who might be doing audit for the first time. So as far as objective of asset classification norms are concerned, so there are two parts in that. One is classification and second one is provisioning of advances or provisioning of assets. Now, as far as classification of advances is concerned or classification of assets is concerned, bank is required to do that with objective criteria. And once the criteria is adopted by the bank has to ensure that it is applied in uniform and consistent manner. Now, when I'm saying objective criteria, what it indicates is that there is no scope for any subjectivity or there is no scope for multiple interpretation as far as income recognition and asset classification norms are concerned. So when you talk about asset classification norm, even though there is a myth that there are various interpretations which are possible out of RBI circular, practically that is not the case. In fact, RBI is very categorical and very objective in deciding as to what is the asset classification norm is, barring only one case, if you ask me, wherein a little kind of subjectivity may exist is about whether an account is having an inherent weakness or not. But apart from that, the criteria has been very much objective. There is no scope for subjectivity is there, and we'll unfold that part when we talk about individual type of asset-wise classification norms. Second is that you need to apply those norms uniformly and consistently so that the bank is not supposed to distinguish between two account holders. So irrespective of the background of the borrower, irrespective of maybe credit rating of the borrower, or irrespective of the type of security and the quantum of security offered by the borrower, the norms are same. There is no difference between one borrower and another borrower. There is no difference between so-called famous borrower and so-called not so famous borrower. So everything, the classification norms remain same. Secondly, when we talk about provisioning, firstly, we need to verify as to what is the classification of assets. So if it is a standard asset classification, the prudential provision has been prescribed by Reserve Bank of India as to how much provision has to be made. If you are having an NPA account, then the next thing is that you need to verify as to period for which the account has remained into NPA category. Based on that, the account will be classified into substandard, DA1, DA2 and DA3 category. And then the next question is that whether any security is available, whether there is any underlying security available with respect to that NPA account or not. If the security is available, you need to verify as to what is the realizable value of that. So based on the classification and availability and realizability of the security, the provisioning will be decided about. Now, broadly, when you talk about any advance account or any asset in banking arena, broadly it is divided into two parts. One is standard asset, also called as performing assets. Second one is non-performing asset. And the simplest definition of standard asset is that any account which is not a non-performing account, you can say that it is a standard account. More precise definition is that these are the accounts or these are the advances which do not carry a risk which is more than normal banking risk. As compared to that, as a non-performing account, these are the accounts which are carrying higher risk than normal banking risk. Now, what is normal banking risk? Normal banking risk is inherent risk which is there for any lending business. So suppose any entity is into lending operations or lending business, there is an inherent risk of losing money. So that's a normal banking risk. But beyond that, if there is an additional risk which is involved, then in that particular case, the account might be required to be marked as NPA. Even though account otherwise is looking normal, otherwise the account is not overdrawn or overdue, but still that account will be required to be marked as NPA because there is a comparatively higher risk involved as compared to normal risk. Let me just give you a couple of examples of such instances. Let's presume that we are having a project loan. In case of project loans, as you are aware, there is a DCCO which is defined at the time of sanction of the loan. DCCO is nothing but expected date of commencement of commercial operation for that entity. So suppose that entity is not able to start the commercial operation as on that date, then even though the account is otherwise regular in repayment, otherwise regular in servicing the interest, but still, since it is not able to start the commercial operation by that date, the account will get marked into an NPA category account. Second similar example is that suppose you are having a borrower account wherein there is underlying security of immovable properties there, and that particular immovable property is maybe again valued by the bank, maybe after a period of 2 years or 3 years. And when the new valuation report is received by the bank, if the bank sees that after the new valuation, as compared to the earlier valuation report, the value of the property or value of the security has deteriorated beyond 50%. In that case, even though the account is otherwise normal, otherwise within the limit, still the account will be straight away marked as doubtful asset category account. So these are few examples about what is called as higher risk than normal banking risk. So if such a risk exists in an account, then that account needs to be marked as NPA. Another two criteria about NPA account is that there might be an account which has ceased to generate income for the bank, so that will be also marked as NPA. And then we have various criteria based on which the NPA classification is required to be made. So in next few slides, we'll run through certain criteria which RBI has defined to mark an account as NPA. So let's start with term loan accounts. Now, term loan account, the criteria is that in case if the interest or installment, if it remains overdue for a period of more than 90 days, then that account will be required to be marked as NPA. So first condition is that there has to be overdue portion. And then if the overdue portion is outstanding for more than 90 days, then only the account will get marked as NPA. So firstly, you need to calculate overdue amount. Now, how you calculate overdue amount is you need to calculate the difference between ledger balance at the end of the day as on a cutoff date. As compared to that, you have to verify that what is the ideal drawing power of that particular account. So if your ledger balance is more than ideal DP, the differential is overdue. That overdue portion, once you divide by say EMI, presuming that you are having the EMI based loan, if the number of EMIs are more than 3, then naturally 90 days will get completed. If the number of EMIs overdue are up to 3, naturally 90 days will not get over by any cutoff date. So based on that, you need to calculate the NPA classification. Then there is para 2.1.3. This para is kind of a liberal para, wherein in case of an account wherein only interest is due. So here the concept is that there is no principal portion which is repayable. So in that case, if the interest due and charge in that particular account for 1 quarter, if it doesn't get serviced fully within next 90 days, then at the end of that next quarter, the account will get marked as NPA. Just to give a comparable example, presuming that you are doing March 2021 audit, last but 1 quarter you have to refer to. So you have to refer to October to December quarter. Whatever interest is debited or charged in that quarter, in that particular borrower account, if that interest is not serviced by the end of next quarter, that is by 31st March 2021, then the account will turn into NPA account. So it's kind of liberal thing. It is something which is beyond 90 days, which has been permitted. But friends, you have to just keep one thing in mind, that when you're applying this para 2.1.3, it has to be a case wherein principal amount is not required to be paid by that particular borrower. So typical case is that wherein there is a moratorium period granted for principal repayment, but interest is payable on as and when basis. So in those cases, this para will come into play. 2 exceptions are there to this particular rule. First one is that suppose you are having a loan account wherein there is a moratorium period granted for interest as well as principal portion. So in that case, there is no amount due. So there is no question of any account becoming overdue, and naturally the account will be always under a PA category. Second exception is that suppose you are having a staff housing loan or any other similar staff loans are there, wherein the repayment is in a different form. Like as you are aware, in most of the banks, the repayment of any staff loan is firstly towards principal, and then whatever is interest is there, that gets repaid. So there actually you need not have to follow that interest, principal and to para 2.1.3, but you have to go by the repayment schedule which has been prescribed by that bank for staff loan. And if anything is overdue beyond 90 days, you need to simply mark that account as NPA account without bothering that whether it is a principal or whether it is a interest portion. Let me just look at the query. Where due to force majeure clause, the project could not commence, does it fall outside the normal risk as specified? Sir, actually, in case of force majeure, there is an option available to the bank that the borrower can apply to the bank and DCCO can be extended. So there are multiple options which are given. So without reason, actually DCCO can get extended by 2 years without downgrading of assets. So that is first thing. As far as infra and non-infra projects are concerned, then additional 2 and 1 years are provided in case of any reasons are there, like court litigation is there, or as you said, force majeure is there. So in that case, the DCCO can be extended. So there is an upper cap on how many years the DCCO can be extended. Once you cross that, then naturally it will fall into NPA category. So force majeure can be one of the reason wherein the borrower can apply to the bank to extend the DCCO. Bank can accept that particular request and they can extend the DCCO. So the account can be continued under a standard asset category. As far as the bills purchased are concerned, if bill remains overdue for a period of more than 90 days, then account will get marked as NPA. As far as agriculture advances are concerned, if interest or installment, if it remains overdue for a period of 2 crop seasons for short duration crop and 1 crop season for long duration crop, then the account will be required to be marked as NPA. The crop season is defined as period up to harvesting of crop raised, and the crop seasons are determined by SLBC, that is state level banking committees. So wherever you are doing a bank audit, you need to refer to the minutes of SLBC, and you need to pull out the data about what is the crop season defined for a particular crop, which is which is related to the agricultural loan which you are verifying. Long duration crop is the crop wherein the crop season is more than 12 months. So in that case, 1 crop season is the criteria. For others, short duration crop, there will be 2 crop seasons criteria as far as overdue interest or installment is concerned. Now, as far as agriculture advances are concerned, those of you who have done agricultural based branches, they must be aware that many a times the banks claim that there are agricultural advances are concerned. So anyway, NPA norms are not applicable. That is not the real case. The real case is that as far as agriculture advances are concerned, based on certain conditions and criteria, the banks have been given discretion to reschedule the agriculture advances. But it is not like a generic thing that bank at their will cannot really reschedule all agriculture advances. So we just touch upon the instances wherein reschedulement is permitted. Now, when I'm saying reschedulement is permitted, what I mean to say is, if these conditions are complied, then in spite of reschedulement, the account will retain the class of asset. If these conditions are not fulfilled, bank can very well reschedule the loan, but then the retention of class benefit is not there. So standard account, which if it is rescheduled without fulfilling the condition, that will get downgraded to substandard asset category. There are in all 5 circulars which you need to refer to. 2 circulars dated 2015, and then we have master directions of 16, 17, and 18. And whenever you are applying this particular circular, firstly, whenever a banker says that a particular farm credit or particular borrower account, to be specific, is rescheduled, and because of which now there is no installment which is overdue because there is a moratorium of 1 year granted and all those things. Firstly, as an auditor, you need to verify that whether that particular borrower account is fulfilling the conditions which are specified in the definition of farm credit. So 23rd April 2015 circular gives a definition of farm credit. So first check that whether your account is really falling into that or not. Presuming that that is there in that farm credit definition, the next part is that the reschedulement is permitted only when natural calamity happens. So it's not that any agricultural account can be simply rescheduled as and when required by the bank, but it is based on the criteria that there has to be a natural calamity. There are 12 types of natural calamities which are defined in the circular. And what RBI has asked the bankers is to create an institutional framework wherein the bank will have a blueprint of action plan with adequate delegation of powers and discretionary powers given to divisional managers and zonal managers, so that whenever a natural calamity is declared or other natural calamity takes place, without loss of time, the action plan can be immediately implemented at the lowest possible level, that is maybe at the divisional manager level or zonal manager level. Now, how these steps occur actually, whenever there is an area which is affected by natural calamity, there will be a meeting convened either by SLBC or district level consultative committee. So if the calamity is covering entire state, SLBC will call up a meeting. If it is only covering certain portion of the state, the district level consultative committee meeting will be called. As far as declaration of natural calamity is concerned, it is a domain of sovereign. So either a central or state government has to declare something as a national calamity. Just to give an example, COVID-19 is not declared as a natural calamity. So farm credits which are there, they cannot take benefit of this particular circular just because COVID-19 pandemic is there. But suppose there is an earthquake is there, or maybe any other natural calamity is there. In that particular case, this benefit is extended. Another condition is that there has to be assessed crop of not less than 33%. Then only this benefit is available. Now, how the restructuring takes place, we'll divide that into two parts. That is short-term agriculture loans and another is long-term agriculture loan. Now, in case of short-term agriculture loan, there is one more condition is there, that the particular loan has to be a normal loan. That is, that loan should not be having any overdue portion at the time of occurrence of natural calamity. So even if we are just having an overdue portion of say 1 rupee, or maybe some portion is overdue just for 1 day also, as on the date of happening of natural calamity, the circular benefits are not available. In the sense, if you do that for overdue account, then that account will get downgraded. Now let us presume that we are having a farm credit, a short-term agriculture loan, and that is not overdue at the time of happening of natural calamity. The next test is that what is your crop loss? So if the crop loss is between 33% and 50%, the maximum period extension for repayment granted is 2 years. If it is more than 50%, you can have it extended up to 5 years. 2 and 5 years will come along with moratorium period of at least 1 year. And interest and principal due in the year of natural calamity can be converted into term loan. No additional security is required. And as far as long-term agriculture loans are concerned, if only crop for that year is damaged and the productive assets are not damaged, then reschedulement of installment during the year of natural calamity is possible. Extension of loan is permitted by 1 year. Payment of interest can also be postponed. But if productive assets are damaged either partially or totally, then repayment period can be extended to the extent of 5 years. Just to give an example of what is productive asset is, simplest example is say maybe a tractor loan, or another example is that maybe loan given for electric pumps for irrigation purpose at any farmer's place. So these are typical examples of productive assets. Asset classification benefits, as I said, are getting extended. So once you fulfill these conditions, you can retain the class of assets. Additional finances will naturally be treated as standard account. And interestingly, in case if there is a second restructuring happening under the same circular, that is due to natural calamity, it will not be considered as repeated restructuring, and still you can get benefited out of that to retain the class of asset. For crop insurance proceeds, firstly it has to be adjusted against the restructured portion, and then whatever balance remains, you have to adjust against fresh loans. So typically a FIFO system has to be followed as far as insurance proceeds are concerned. Then as far as derivative transactions are concerned, if overdue receivable is outstanding or overdue for more than 90 days, then the derivative account will be marked as NPA. In case of liquidity facilities, if they remain overdue for a period of more than 90 days with respect to securitization transaction, then that account will be marked as NPA. Then as far as credit card dues are concerned, it's comparatively a different criteria. So as far as credit card dues are concerned, in case if the minimum amount payable, which is always there in the credit card statement, if it is not paid within 90 days from the next statement date, then the account will turn into NPA. So here the criteria is about payment of minimum amount due, and not really the entire credit card dues are applicable for 90 days delinquencies criteria. Then we'll talk about the cash credit accounts, that is working capital finance accounts, that is CCOD accounts. And if an account is out of order, then that account will be marked as NPA. Now there are 3 conditions which are set out for out of order status. The first one is continuously overdrawn for more than 90 days. It means that your end of the day balance, if it is always in excess of your limit or drawing power, whichever is lower, and if it happens for a continuous period of more than 90 days, the account will be required to be marked as NPA. Even in case of instances wherein intraday balances are below the limit or below the DP, still that won't help you, because you need to calculate based on end of the day balances. Next criteria or next condition is that if there are no credits in the account for a continuous period of 90 days as on the date of balance sheet. So when you are talking about March 21st balance sheet, if there are no credits in a CCOD account from 1st January till 31st March, then the account will be marked as NPA. Third condition is that if the credits in the accounts are not sufficient to cover the interest debited during the same period, the account will turn into NPA. Since we are talking about March 21st audit, we need to compare the credit summation in the account in the last quarter, that is from January to March quarter. So let's presume that January, February and March, we are having an interest of say 5,000 rupees for every month. So in all, we are having 15,000 rupees which are debited on the account of interest portion. So if the credit submission is more than 15,000 during the same period, then in that case, the account will be marked as performing. In case if your credit submission is less than 15,000, then the account will be marked as a standard account, sorry, NP account. Now, as far as this credit submission is concerned, that credit need not be subsequent to the interest charged in the account. So here the concept is not related to interest servicing. The concept is related to matching of credit submission with interest debited. So suppose we are having a case wherein say 20,000 rupees are deposited on say 10th of January. So that is sufficient to take care of that 15,000 interest, which is debited subsequent to that credit, but that will also suffice the purpose and the account will be marked as a PA. Now all these three conditions are set out for out of order status, and any of the condition, if it gets satisfied, then your CCOD account will be required to be marked as a PA account. Now, there is a definition of overdue which is defined in Master Circular itself. So, if an amount due to the bank under any credit facility, if it is not paid on the due date fixed by the bank, then that will be called as a overdue account. So, let me just give a couple of examples. See, let's take first example that in case of say housing loan, someone pays you installments of say 12 months in advance in the month of April, and subsequently doesn't pay a single installment till that financial year end. Still that account will be a PA account. Even if you look at the account, it will look like all 11 interest or 12 months interest are appearing one after the another with no subsequent credit. But here, since he has already paid all the installments, there is no installment which is really overdue. So your ideal DP and ledger balance, if you compare, there may not be any overdue portion itself. So the account will be always marked as a PA account. Second example which I can give, of overdue is that, see, wherever a due date is fixed, so we are correlating all these things with the due date which is fixed by the bank. So once the due date is crossed, the account turns into NPA. So whenever an interest is debited to that account, that interest is presumed to be immediately due. So there is no past due concept. So the amount of balance as per the ledger account which you are supposed to consider is end of the day balance after application of interest. So there is no moratorium which is granted for any interest portion. So 31st March 2021 interest which is debited in the account is due on the same date and not on 1st of April. So 1st of April is the second day and 31st March is the first day. Let me just look at the query which is posted. In case if the account is not overdrawn and unused credit available, whether the interest should be serviced to determine the out of order. Again, I will just like to clarify, there is no concept of interest servicing, but I presume your query is related to credit summation. So whenever there is a credit summation which you are counting, the unused credit is irrelevant. So the account might be within the limit, but still, if your credit summation in that account in the same period, that is from 1st January till 31st March, if it is less than interest debited in the account, then the account will be considered as out of order status. So unused credit is not really relevant. What is credited in the account will be relevant. So even if the account is within the limit, the account will get marked as a NPA account. RBI has given certain temporary deficiencies defined in the Master Circular, and the temporary deficiencies which are defined in that particular para, the first two lines are a little interesting from bankers' perspective. RBI has specified over there that because of any temporary deficiencies like overdrawing in the account, non-submission of stock statement, non-renewal of an account, so merely on the basis of temporary deficiencies, one should not consider an account as NPA and one should look at the conduct of the account. But in the same para, subsequently, RBI has clarified that which are the temporary deficiencies and what is the tolerance limit for that temporary deficiency. So the temporary deficiencies which are specified are of two types. One is about the non-submission of stock statement. Other is about non-renewal of accounts. Now, as far as non-submission of stock statement is concerned, RBI has given a leverage to the large borrower accounts, wherein it has stated that for large borrower accounts, many times it takes time to compile the data for which is required for stock statement submission. So in those cases, a bank is permitted to use a drawing power as per the last stock statement submitted for a period of next 3 months. And subsequently also, if there is no stock statement submitted, then after that in next 90 days, the account will be required to be marked as NPA. Now, just to give an example, suppose you are having September month stock statement, which is the last stock statement which is submitted. Then in that particular case, The September stock statement DP can be used for the month of say October, November and December. After completion of that 3 months period, subsequently you cannot make use of this DP. So once after that 90 days gets over, on 31st March, you need to mark that account as NPA. So just to put it in simpler terms, if you have an account where its stock statement is not submitted for last 6 months, you have to mark that account as NPA. But this particular concept comes with a rider. This leverage is applicable only for large borrower accounts and not otherwise. So suppose you are having an account of say just 50 lakhs limit, this criteria doesn't apply. So there you can use the DP only for 1 month. And after that, if there is no stock statement submitted for next 90 days, the account has to be marked as NPA. So it's not a blanket permission given to have such instances utilized by the borrowers who are not regular in submission of stock statement. Then the next temporary deficiency is about non-renewal cases and non-regulation of ad hoc cases. So we'll take up both these instances. What RBI stipulated is, in case if your account is not regularly renewed within 180 days from the end of original due date for renewal, then the account will be marked as NPA. And when you do that, the short reviews or technical reviews are really redundant. In the sense, when you count 180 days, that 180 days counting should start from the original due date. And even if the bank has sanctioned a short review or technical review for that borrower, that counting should not be at the end of that short review period. So short review is really redundant as far as this counting of 180 days is concerned. As far as non-regulation of ad hoc limits are concerned, RBI has given a time limit of 180 days. So if any ad hoc limit has been continued beyond 180 days, you need to mark that account as NPA. So these two conditions are very critical. And in fact, RBI has issued a circular in August 2020, clarifying and reiterating this point once again, by stating that the bankers are in a habit to keep on renewing or doing a short review without adequate documents being available on record, and that will not be construed as actual renewal. So the actual renewal means a regular 1 year full-fledged renewal which the bank is supposed to make. So if that doesn't happen in for 180 days period, naturally the account will be required to be marked as NPA. Few exceptions and clarifications which RBI has given. That is the advance which has been sanctioned against the own term deposits receipts of the bank, or NECs, IVPs, KVPs, or surrender value of life insurance policies. Then such accounts need not be treated as NPAs, even though 90 days delinquency might have been made, provided that the security is available which is sufficiently covering the outstanding balances. Otherwise, normal norms will apply. Another point is that the interest recognition in such accounts will be subject to availability of margin. So interest getting debited in that account is permitted only till the time security cover is available. Beyond that, it will be on the realization basis. As far as advances against gold ornaments are concerned or any other government security is concerned, there is no exemption which is granted. So the normal norms are applicable. And as far as central government guaranteed accounts are concerned, NPA norms are applicable only if government repudiates the guarantee when it is invoked. But otherwise, central government guaranteed accounts have been exempted. So whenever there is a valid and running central government guarantee is there for any account, which otherwise is supposed to be marked as NPA, you need not have to mark that account as NPA. It will continue to be under standard asset category, but with a rider that your income recognition will be on realization basis. For state government guaranteed accounts, no such relaxation is there. Normal IRAC norms are supposed to be adopted by the bank. RBI has also given a clarification that classification of advances will be based on co-borrower basis. It means that whenever any facility of a borrower gets marked as NPA, rest all exposures are required to be treated as NPA. So it's not account wise, but it is borrower wise. There are two exceptions to this rule again. In case of LCBD facility, the exposure is taken on the banker, that is the bank who is issuing the LC. So as far as the borrower is concerned, that is not really directly related to that borrower. The exposure is not to the borrower. So in this case, LCBD facility might remain into a standard asset category, presuming that it is valid and there is no overdue portion. So LCBD can remain standard even if all other accounts have been marked as NPA. Another exception to this rule is credit facilities to PACs and FSS, which have been given for onward lending arrangement. So these accounts need not be marked as NPA just because certain underlying onward lending accounts are marked as NPA. So in that case, as far as the onward lending is concerned, maybe some portion of that might turn into NPA. So only that portion will get carved out and marked as NPA. Rest of the portion will continue to be considered as PA by the bank. As far as consortium advances are concerned, each member bank will be required to classify the accounts based on their own record of recovery. So suppose we are having 4 member bank, 4 consortium member banks. Out of that, maybe 3 might have marked that account as NPA. One bank might still mark that account as PA because the record of recovery is normal. So if that bank doesn't have delinquency of 90 days, that account need not be marked as NPA by that particular bank. Now here actually, auditor has to be little vigilant as far as this concept is concerned, wherein he need to test that account as to whether any inherent weakness in such account is existent or not. If he is of the opinion that there is an inherent weakness which is exists, then naturally he doesn't have to wait for that 90 days norms. He can very well consider and mark that account as NPA. Another thing is that there are 2 straightaway classification norms which RBI has provided, wherein there is a perceived potential threat of recovery which is seen. First one we already talked, but I will just reiterate that wherever there is a erosion in value which is beyond 50% as compared to the last value assessed, then that particular account will be straight away classified to doubtful asset category without waiting for any 90 days norms to be fulfilled. Second straightaway classification norm is about the realizable value of security. If it gets below 10% of the outstanding ledger account balance, then that account will be straight away classified as loss asset category. You don't have to wait for that 90 days delinquencies to happen. As far as these both 2 straightaway classification norms are concerned, there is one underlying presumption is that all these accounts are secured loans. For unsecured loans, this straightaway classification norms will never apply because there is no security ever which was existent. Now, what is the definition of secured loan? Secured loans are those loans wherein the underlying security which is available in the bank is at least of 10% of the limit which is sanctioned to that particular borrower account. So only in these cases that loan will be categorized as secured loan, and then these 2 tests should be applied for straightaway classification norms. Just to reiterate, these straightaway classification norms are in the nature of substantially higher risk as compared to normal banking risk. So their normal 90 days norms are not applicable. The auditor is not supposed to wait for that particular days. Another one is fraud case. So for any fraud case, a bank is required to provide 100% irrespective of the security available. So even if you're having the security of say NSE, KVP, or maybe bank's own term deposit receipts, still you have to make 100% provision for frauds. And there's only one relaxation which is given, wherein RBI stated that if the bank has reported the fraud under FMR framework, then in that particular case, the bank can stagger the provision in next 4 quarters. The first quarter will be the quarter when the fraud has been detected. That is only a kind of, you can say, a staggering relaxation which is provided, but otherwise, ultimately fraud is required to be provided for 100% basis. If the fraud is not reported to RBI, the bank is required to make 100% provision against that instantly in the same quarter. One more clarity which RBI has given, and as I said, this is where there is a little kind of subjectivity there. That in case if you observe that there are some solitary or few credit entries are there just before the balance sheet date, and due to those entries, the account is getting regularized, then in that case, you need to verify as to whether the account is having an inherent weakness or not. And secondly, you need to verify the source of funding of those credit entries. Now, let me tell you a few instances, practical examples, wherein you need to consider those entries maybe as a genuine entry. And in certain cases, you should not be considering that as a genuine entries, and you need to mark that account as NPA, even though the account might have been regularized. So let's first talk about the positive side. Let's presume that we are having a government contractor's account, and the account has been having various delinquencies throughout the year. The conduct of the account is also not good. But at the end of the year, he receives lump sum funds which are released by the government authorities. So in that case, these are genuine business receipts are there. So you can of course grant this benefit of genuine receipts to the borrower, and the account can be treated as a standard account. But as compared to that, let's take another example. Where the account gets regularized by way of introduction of loan from directors, or maybe capital contribution from the directors, or maybe group loans or group transfers wherein there is no underlying commercial transactions there. So now in these cases, these receipts are not really business receipts. These are in the nature of just entries, or maybe in the nature of advances which are given, loans advances which are given. So in those cases, since there is no business income, or since it is not getting generated out of realization of book debts of that particular borrower, you need to ignore those entries, and then you need to ask a question as to whether you perceive an inherent weakness in that account based on the conduct of the account. If you are certain about inherent weakness, you should simply qualify the account as NPA. If you are little unsure about that, you can ask the bank to evidence before you the manner of regulation of the account, the manner in which, or the source of funds for regulation of the account. If you're satisfied with the definition, the documents produced before you, you can consider that account as standard account, but otherwise you need to mark such accounts as NPA account based on inherent weaknesses. Let me look at the query. If the rate of interest is increased, but there is no increase in EMI, or the period of repayment will, will it be treated as NPA? If there is an increase in the rate of interest, it has to be either of that either it will increase the EMI or it will increase the period of repayment. Can you just redraft the query and repose? Because once you raise the rate of interest, your EMI or period, either of that has to undergo change. Both cannot really remain same. And just to say, second point is that whenever there is an increase in rate of interest, there is no concession which has been granted to a borrower account. So in that case, anyway, it will never be called as a restructuring case, and that's why it will not get downgraded. But if the query is different, you can just repost the query by redrafting. Now, as far as valuation of securities is concerned, the mandatory valuation is applicable only in cases wherein the account is NPA, and if the exposure to that particular borrower is more than 5 crores, then annual stock audit by external agencies is mandatory, and valuation of immovable property has to be carried out once in 3 years by approved valuer. Now, in this particular case, if you find out that if you have an immovable property which is not valued in last 3 years, and if your NPA exposure is also above 5 crores, then it is your discretion as auditor to decide as to whether you want to continue with the same valuation or whether you want to simply discard the valuation and treat that security value as zero. Same logic applies to annual stock audit also. So it's auditor discretion. And to be fair and conservative, I will say that it's better that you ignore that valuation, because in the 3 years, there might be a deterioration in the value of the property also. For stock audits, I did not have to say anything. If there is no external evidence available about the existence of the stock, practically you cannot presume that the security is available. But in case wherein the account is PA, then irrespective of the exposure, there is no mandatory valuation of the securities. So typically banks will have their own rules set out in the credit policy or advance policies. Based on that, the bank will do the valuation. If your NPA exposure is below 5 crores, again, it is not mandatory, it is optional. But then as an auditor, you need to apply your professional skepticism and professional skills to decide about whether the valuation is apparently adequate or not. Just to give an example, that suppose you're having a vehicle loan. In case of vehicle loan, you cannot continue the invoice value and take it as a security value for say next 3 years, 5 years. That is not possible. So you need to verify as to what is the basis of banks, taking the value of such instances like plant-end machinery, vehicle, or any other movable property, whether they have a consistent basis on which they keep on deteriorating the valuation of that particular security or not. If you're satisfied, you can go with that. Otherwise, you can insist upon certain norms which you as a professional are comfortable with. Two quick questions, and I will like the participants to respond that in chat box. First question is that I will give a illustration, and I will like to have your responses on that. Let's presume that we are having a term loan account, and the term loan account is having 4 installments overdue as on say 14th of December 2020. And subsequently, before end of the month, the bank has been successful in recovering 2 installments out of that. So in December 8, only 2 installments are overdue. And in January, February, March, the borrower has paid just 1 installment. So till March now, the position is that 2 installments are still overdue. So as an auditor, will you mark this account as NPA, or you will say that the account is PA as on 31st March 2021 when you are signing off the balance sheet? Yeah, NPA as on 14 December is fine, but I'm asking for the NPA position as on 31st March when only 2 installments are overdue. So will you say this account as PA or NPA? Yeah, that's right. Bhaveshji has answered it rightly, since entire overdues are not recovered and it's only a case of partial recovery, the account will remain into NPA category. It cannot be treated as a standard account. Let's move on to the second question. Suppose you have an account which is NPA as on 31st March 2021. Let's say you have a CCOD account which is continuously overdrawn from say 10th of December till 31st March, or maybe a term loan account which is having 4 installments overdue as on 31st March. You are signing the balance sheet of that particular branch on say 10th of April, and on 5th of April, the entire overdues in that account have been cleared off. So there is no overdue as on 5th of April. Or maybe let's take an extreme case that the accounts have been closed on 5th of April out of genuine business sources fund. So will you treat such accounts as PA or NPA as on 31st March? So let me just repeat the question. On 31st March, we have 4 installments overdue in a term loan account. And on 5th of April, the account is closed. Out of genuine receipts, will you say that it is NPA or whether it is PA? Okay, I think there are mixed responses and few are still thinking over NPA or PA. So let me just clarify this. See, as far as account regularization after the date of balance sheet is concerned, it is not an event occurring after the date of balance sheet as per AS4. It's a normal ongoing transaction. So what is more important is that what is the position of that account as on 31st March? And if on 31st March the account is an NPA account, even though the account is closed or regularized subsequently, the account has to remain under NPA category only. Auditor doesn't have any discretion to say that it is a PA account. Just let me tell you another corollary also. Let's presume that on 5th of April, if the account is getting closed or regularized, if you want to treat that as a PA account, vice versa, you might need to then treat certain accounts as NPA accounts as on 31st March, which became NPA from the period of say 1st April till 5th April. So if you start doing that, it will be an unending process. Your balance sheet will never get closed. So whatever is the status of the account is there as on 31st March, you need to go by that. And based on that, you need to say that whether the account is PA or NPA. These are 2 quick references. That is for para 4.2.5, which talks about requirement of recoveries of entire arrears whenever an account is required to be upgraded. And para 4.2.2 gives a clarification as to why that 30 days period is given. The 30 days period is given for clarifying the doubts which are there in asset classification. So otherwise, there is no past due concept which exists. There is no moratorium or additional period which is given for repayment of any dues. So now we will come to the MSME circulars. That is the relief, one-time relief, which is granted to MSME borrowers. The first circular was issued in February 2018. And at that point of time, the cutoff date which was given was 31st August 2017. So any MSME account which was a performing account as on 31st August 2017, and it was having exposure below 25 crores, such accounts were eligible for one-time restructuring exercise. Again, over here, when I say eligible, I mean to say that they can retain the class of asset. So even though it is restructured, the class of asset will be retained. 6 June 2018 was a kind of addendum to this 7th February circular. And then the scheme was extended by 1st January 2019 circular. Again, the extension was given on 11th February. Again, extension was given on 6th of August 2020 circular. So basically, in all these circulars, there are 2 dates which are of utmost importance. First day is about the eligibility. That is, the cutoff date is given, and on that cutoff date, the account has to be under a standard asset category. Second one is the date by which the scheme is required to be implemented. So these 2 dates are very much relevant as far as any of these MSME circulars are concerned. And as far as audit of financial year 2021 is concerned, last 2 circulars are of utmost importance. So we'll just run through the circular dated 6th August 2020, which is, as I said, that which is in continuation of 11th February 2020 circular. So it's a one-time relaxation given for restructuring of MSME standard accounts without requirement to downgrade that those accounts. Now, when I'm saying one-time relaxation, what I mean to say is, if any of the earlier schemes have been utilized by that particular MSME borrower, then second-time restructuring is not possible under MSME relief, and the account will be required to be downgraded if it is restructured. Now, what is the eligibility criteria? Even that is defined by RBI. That as far as 6th August circular is concerned, cutoff date is 1st March. So on 1st March, the aggregate exposure of fund-based, non-fund-based to that MSME account, a combined exposure of all banks and NBFCs should not exceed 25 crores. Now here exposure is word is specified. So exposure need not be balance outstanding. So you can have an exposure which is in terms of limit. So ideally what you need to see is that what is the limit or outstanding balance, whichever is higher. Especially in case of non-fund based limit, you need to be very critical because many times the non-fund based limits are sanctioned on a much higher side. They may not really get utilized, but when you are counting the aggregate exposure, even the unutilized limits will get counted. Second condition is that borrower has to be a standard account as on 1st March 2020, and it has to remain in. It has to be there till date of implementation of restructuring. The account which is marked as NPA by the bank on 1st of March 2020, even though it is subsequently upgraded, still this scheme is not applicable. Another instance can be that an account is otherwise NPA on 1st of March, but the bank hasn't marked that account as NPA. Still, that account should not be considered as eligible. As far as other requirements are concerned, borrower has to be registered under GST, except for those MSMEs wherein the GST registration is not mandatory. In case if the GST registration is not there with the borrower, even though he was required to be registered under GST, then that particular entity can opt for GST registration during the phase of implementation. So as on the date of implementation, ultimately he has to be a GST registered vendor. Restructuring of borrower accounts is required to be implemented on or before 31st March 2021. Besides this, there is no apparent eligibility criteria. So how to do restructuring, how much to do restructuring, that is left to the discretion of the banks. And the bank has to really decide about how many years to do restructuring, how to do a restructuring, like whether it should be ballooning or whether it should be postponement of installments or whether it should be in the kind of moratorium period. Entire thing has been left to the discretion of the bank. So typically as an auditor, you need to ask for the board approved policy for this MSME relief. And based on that, you need to verify as to how the restructuring has been done and whether it is adherent to the internal policy of the bank. So it can happen that in between the intervening period of after 1st March 2020 till the date of implementation, the account might slip into NPA category. But then once you implement the package, the NPA categorization can be again rolled back to PA category, so that benefit is available. Additional provision requirement is specified that additional 5% provision is required to be made, and it has to be retained till specified period or account demonstrating a satisfactory performance. That satisfactory performance is defined as the criteria wherein no payment should be overdue beyond 30 days during the intervening period of 1 year. That intervening period of 1 year will start from the date when the first installment is due. So during that particular 1 year, you should not have a overdue portion beyond 30 days. So if that condition is satisfied, you can reverse the provision. Otherwise, it will remain into that same category along with provision. Accounts earlier restructured, as I said, it is not eligible to be again restructured under this MSME scheme. Post restructuring normal NPA norms are there. Disclosure requirements are same, which are simple. Bank has to disclose number of accounts which are restructured and the quantum of that in terms of value. And in case if any account gets downgraded or maybe restructured second time, then it will become an NPA account, and subsequently it is eligible for upgradation whenever the satisfactory performance is demonstrated as per July 15 circular. So now we'll talk about COVID-19 circulars at length. So we'll start with 27 March 2020 circular, and we'll unfold all the circulars one by one. This circular was very much applicable for March 2020 audit. I will just reiterate that because all the circulars are aligned with each other. Now, the first circular which got issued on 27 March 2020, the purpose of the issuance of this circular was to mitigate the burden of debt servicing brought due to disruption on account of COVID-19 pandemic. And RBI wanted to ensure that there is a continuity of viable business. So that was the basic concept behind this circular. Relief was provided to all the account holders in 3 forms. One was reschedulement of payment, second one was easing of working capital finance, and third one was relaxation from classification as SMA and NPA. one thing which you need to keep in mind, that this circular 27 March circular was made applicable to all the borrower accounts. So whether account is PA or NPA, doesn't really matter. The circular applies to all. Now we'll discuss about what is the relief which has been granted by way of this particular circular. So firstly, we'll talk about term loan accounts. Term loans will include EMIs, interest, principal repayment concepts, bullet payment, credit card dues. Everything is included. So in short, other than CCOD, all forms are included. Now, the relief granted was in the form of moratorium period of 3 months for payment of all the installments which are falling due between 1st March till 31st May. So in case of term loan accounts, whatever is the installment which is falling due between these 3 months, a borrower was given an option to opt for a moratorium period of 3 months, and accordingly, the residual tenure of the account will be required to be extended. So suppose someone has 3 months moratorium period, his repayment will be shifted further for 3 months period. Now here you need to keep one thing in mind. They are saying that residual tenure should be extended to the extent of moratorium period only. So what will happen is this 3 months interest, which is falling, for these 3 months, once you load that interest in the rest of the EMIs, naturally your total EMI amount will undergo change if you want to keep that extension only to the limit of 3 months. So you need to verify critically as to whether the EMI has been adjusted suitably by the bank or not. If not, and if the bank has extended the repayment period, then the bank is at fault and you need to mark that account as NPA, because this is the condition which they have specified, that the maximum extension of repayment is restricted to the moratorium period which is granted. Then for working capital facilities, which will naturally exclude NCBD facilities, the relief was permitted in the form of deferment of recovery of interest, which is applied during the period of 1st March till 31st May. So March, April, May interest which is debited in the account, for repayment of that, there is a deferment granted till 31st May. And naturally, it will affect your out of order status also, because the interest is not really due on those respective dates. Third relaxation given was in the form of relaxation in margin. So relaxation in the margin were given in the 2 forms. One is normal margin relaxation. So wherein say earlier 40% or 25% margin is given to say book dates and stocks. So in that case, maybe a bank can decide that instead of 40 and 25%, we'll go for 15% and say 5%. So that was very much permitted. Second is that the bankers were permitted to give a relaxation of working capital assessment. So maybe earlier bank was doing book date, eligible book dates calculation to the extent of say 90 days. And now the bank can give that relaxation to say 150 days or 180 days or maybe 365 days also. That is not defined in the circular. So it is left to the discretion of the bank. So what kind of relief is given by the bank, that you need to see in that particular bank circular or internal policies. Classification as SMA and NPA, practically this circular never gave any relaxation for NPA norms. So the relief which is undertaken by any of the borrower account beyond this circular, that will be construed as a concession given to the borrower, and naturally the account will be downgraded. Otherwise, if someone is taking a relief well within the parameters of this circular, this will not be considered as concession in terms and conditions, so no downgrading will be required. But apart from that, no NPA norm relaxation was really given. So ideally what happened was, it was only an extension which was given for repayment. No NPA relaxation was given. Another point is that whether this circular really applies to all borrowers or whether it is applicable only to the borrowers affected by COVID-19. Now the opening para of the circular itself is making it clear that the circular is applicable only for those accounts which are affected by COVID-19. So you need to ask the bank to demonstrate before you how they have really ascertained this particular aspect. Secondly, depending upon the bank where you are doing the audit, there are various practices which are observed in multiple banks. One practice is that the circular was made applicable to all the term loan account holders or all borrower accounts, irrespective of whether they opt for it or not. And there was an option only which was given to opt out of that. Some banks have acted in a different manner. They have stated that unless a borrower asks us to give this benefit, we are not going to give any moratorium period. So you need to see that how the banks have really gone and what is their policy. And based on that, you need to decide whether a particular borrower has opted for this scheme or not. If the borrower hasn't opted for the scheme, normal IRAC norms are applicable. Then we have a RBI circular dated 17th April 2020 circular. This was a circular actually which really gave a relaxation about asset classification and provisioning norms. Now again over here, the relaxation which was given was restricted only to the financial delinquencies and not otherwise. So what actually RBI did out of this circular, which was not there in 27th March circular, is they gave relaxation for term loans and working capital facilities, but at the same time they provided for some additional provisioning requirement, and also they provided for disclosure norms, disclosure requirements. So the relief granted to term loan was restricted only to eligible borrower accounts. So what is eligible borrower account? That if you have a term loan which is standard on 29 February 2020, and if the term loan account holder has availed a moratorium period as per that 27 March circular, then only the relief will be provided to such term loan account holders. So if an account is not a standard account, or if the account holder has not opted for availing the moratorium period, then the relief is the account is not eligible for this relief. So now what is the relief? Relief is that when you are calculating the delinquency with respect to asset classification norm, you have to exclude the period for which the moratorium period has been granted. So what it means is, as we were discussing, for term loan account holders, there is a 90 days delinquency norm. So if your interest or installment repayment is not done for more than 90 days, the account will get marked as NPA. So when you are counting 90 days delinquency, the period of that moratorium period, that is from 1st March till 31st May, is required to be excluded. So suppose you have completed 70 days up to 29 February, balance 20 days will be counted after the moratorium period gets over. So that is the benefit which was provided. Naturally, another important point is that wherever an account is already an NPA account, but they have got the benefit of moratorium under 27 March circular, upgradation is very much possible by way of repayment of all earlier overdues between the period of 1st March till 31st May. An account can definitely be get upgraded. So upgradation is not stopped. Downgrading is something wherein the relief is granted. For working capital facilities, it was made applicable to all working capital finance facilities, and the account should be a standard account as of 29 February 2020. And the relief was in the form of determination of out of order status, wherein the intervening period of 1st March till 31st May was not supposed to be counted for that 90 days period. So all three conditions of out of order, you should exclude this period of 1st March till 31st May, and then you have to apply your yardsticks for classification norms. Again, over here also, any account which was NPA on 29 February, that will be naturally eligible for upgradation. So it's not really a standstill clause. It's standstill clause only for standard accounts, not for NPA accounts. So a normal downgrading within NPA account will be very much happening. Upgradation of NPA account will be also happening. So in both ways, for NPA accounts, it's not really warranting anything. As far as provisioning is concerned, what RBI stated, that on one hand, they gave a relaxation of this moratorium and all other things. And by 17th April circular, they gave a standstill clause wherein a period between 1st March till 31st May was not supposed to be counted. But suppose you have an account which would have otherwise marked as NPA, provided that this relief under 17th April circular was not available, then in such cases, RBI has asked the banks to make a provision of 10% of outstanding balance. And if it is made prior to 31st March, you have to make 50% provision, that is 5% provision by March end, and you have to make additional 5% provision by June end. So it depends upon when 90 days delinquency is getting over. Interesting point over here is that under this particular provisioning requirement, the provision is required to be made account wise and not borrower wise. So suppose you have 3 exposures to a particular borrower, but only one of the exposure would have otherwise turned into NPA. So you need to make a provision of 10% only to the extent of balance outstanding for that account and not for entire exposure. This is just an example to explain about when 90 days will get over. Like say 15 December 2019 installment, it will complete 90 days on 15 March. So even though the account is standard because that fellow has availed moratorium period of March to May, the account will not be marked as NPA, but still you have to make a provision of 5% in March, 5% in June. But as compared to that, if you are having the case where 15 January installment is not paid, so in that case, 90 days will get completed only in April. So once 90 days gets completed, by June end, you need to make 10% provision. So that's how this provisioning requirement is there. As far as the provisioning is concerned, provision can be used for slippages of account to make it up for BDDR requirement. residual provision can be adjusted even against other slippages which happen, and the balance which will remain, that can be returned back. Interestingly, this provision is standard asset provision, so you cannot make use of that to knock off your net NPAs. So net NPAs are not affected because of that. Even gross advances will be also not netted off. It will remain same at the same level. Other consideration, just to reiterate, so there is no bar on upgradation which is there. So one can always upgrade the account. And in case of NP accounts which are NP on 29th February, the aging will continue to apply. So downgrading will happen based on normal NP norms. As far as documentation requirement is concerned, documentation is not really required because it is a regulatory relief which is given. So an auditor need not have to really insist on having a document executed for each and every borrower account which is availing the moratorium period. At the same time, it will be prudent that you ask the bank about the bank's policy about the documentation. According to me, a basic document needs to be produced before you, either to prove before you that how a borrower can opt for not opting for that particular moratorium period. So once bank proves before you, you can get yourself satisfied and you can move on. Second interesting thing is that you need to verify whether the CBS system is really competent to adopt all these things. See, here actually we have a moratorium period, so naturally that will get postponed, but we have again a standstill clause. So it might happen that NPA marking might have been stopped by the bank, but at the same time such account needs to be identified and 10% provision is also required to be made. So you need to test the CBS system for that. Third thing is that there are certain banks wherein what they did actually, the CCOD interest portion which was deferred, they had a separate account used for that. So that will again affect your capital adequacy calculation, because your capital adequacy risk weights will be based on the core CCOD account. So if there is a lump sum CCOD interest which is parked somewhere else, you need to correlate that with the original account, and based on that, capital adequacy calculation will be required to be made. Then similar relief was granted for resolution framework accounts, that is June 19 affected accounts, wherein 30 days review period also got the same benefit, that the residual review period will resume from 1st June. So in short, same that 90 days will be excluded in that review period of 30 days. Same way for that resolution timeline, it gets extended by 90 days. So that 180 days will not include the counting from 1st March to till 31st May. So this was a relief which was granted by another circular which was dated 17th April, which was exclusively for giving a resolution for timelines under prudential framework on the resolution of stressed asset, dated 7 June 2019 circular. Before we start with 23rd May circular, let me look at the queries. An email from a borrower for rescheduling, can it be accepted? Okay, I'm presuming that you are not referring to COVID-19 package. If it is a normal reschedulement, bank can very well consider and treat it as an application. If you're talking about COVID-19, wherein he is wishing to avail that moratorium period of 3 months, if the email is from registered email ID, or if the bank is having a mechanism to verify the authenticity of the email, that whether it is received from the borrower or not, then that should suffice the purpose of opting for that scheme. In fact, RBI has been very insistent that banks should be very liberal about adopting the COVID-19 circular. So the facility has to be made by the bank to the borrower. The thing is that they have to demonstrate before you as to how they have ensured that the application is there from the borrower, or the other way around. Like suppose a bank is there which has blanketly applied this moratorium period for all the loan accounts, then the bank has to prove before you that there was an option given to the borrower to opt out of the scheme. So either of the case, the bank has to prove before you. So email, if you're talking about COVID-19 moratorium period availment, that will suffice the purpose. As I said, provided that bank is able to prove before you that it was from an authorized email ID. Then we'll come to 23rd May 2020 circular, which was a kind of extension which was given to 27 March and 17th April circular combined. Why I'm saying combined is both circulars were a little different, but now this 23rd May circular was kind of combined extension. So in term loans, what it gave a kind of a relaxation is the moratorium period was extended by 3 months. That is from 1st June to 31st August. So in short, those who are willing to avail a moratorium period, a total moratorium period of 6 months was possible from 1st March till 31st August. For working capital finance also, similar benefit was extended about interest payment deferment. So now the borrower was given an option to in the form of deferment of its interest repayment till 31st August related to the interest of March to August month. Now, there is one more thing which was added by this circular. Now, the circular stated that first part was about interest deferment. So for 6 months, the interest will be presumed to be due on 31st August. That was the first part. Second one was the option given to the bank, rather to give to the borrower, that at the option of the borrower, the bank can convert this accumulated interest portion into a FITL, that is funded interest term loan portion. Again, this is an option. It is not a tag along with that interest deferment. So interest deferment is different. Option to convert that interest into FITL is different. And this FITL was supposed to be repaid back by 31st March 2021. So that was the period which was granted. So as far as FITL is concerned, you need to verify as to how the accounting treatment has been given by the bank as far as FITL is concerned, because FITL has a prescribed treatment given by RBI circulars. And again, this is an option. It is not really a kind of a tag along with interest deferment. So you need to verify that wherever you are doing the audit. Another relief which was granted was for easing out of working capital finance. Reduction in margin was permitted till 31st August. Temporary enhancement in drawing power in the form of maybe granting extension of say 90 days book dates to say 180 days. Additional limits which are sanctioned. So all those were permitted till 31st March 2021. Asset classification benefit was also extended, that the period between 1st June and 31st August will not be also counted. So in short, standstill clause will be there for all PA accounts as on 29th February till 31st August. So no account will get really downgraded. Same way, another circular was issued on 23rd May related to review period of 30 days. So there, the entire 180 days period of 1st March till 31st August was factored in, and that was extended accordingly. Same way, 180 days period was also extended. So the period between 1st March till 31st August was supposed to be excluded while counting this 30 days period and 180 days period. Let me just look at the query. If FITL is not paid on 31st March, do we have to classify as NPA? No, because of that, FITL will not really become NPA. Firstly, you need to see that what is the repayment schedule which has been granted for FITL. So if it is installment based, anyway, 90 days normal term loan like norms will be applicable. If it is a bullet payment, or if there is a blanket permission given that FITL can be paid by 31st March, then that account will turn into NPA only after completion of 90 days period. So the account has to have a overdue portion of more than 90 days. So on 31st March, presuming that last due date for repayment of FITL was given on say 31st March, the account will not instantly become NPA. That will become NPA on 30th June. My point was a little different. My point was about income recognition. That typically whenever a FITL is granted, whenever the interest gets converted into a funded facility, the FITL as and when it is recovered, then only the interest is supposed to be recognized as income. So I was hinting at that. For NPA, you have to wait for 90 days. So maybe in June, we will really see that how many FITL accounts as such have been remaining outstanding. But accordingly, what I feel is that usually what the banks will do is that they will simply absorb the FITL in their CCOD facilities and finish it off, because the due date is anyway there on 31st March. They will not really prolong it further, because FITL ultimately will become part of your CCOD facility. So when you're counting your DP calculation, it needs to be also correlated with FITL portion, because ultimately it is carved out of your CCOD account. So that is again a bothersome part as far as DP calculation and availability of DP is concerned. Okay, now we'll come to the 6th August circular of COVID-19 resolution framework, and which is a kind of very important circular, rather very crucial circular from the auditor's point of view. Now, in this circular, they have defined certain exposures which are not eligible for resolution framework. Resolution framework is nothing but the circular permits the bank to do a restructuring without downgrading any account. So ineligible exposures are those wherein such benefit is not available. So suppose any of the ineligible exposure, if the bank has restructured that, then in that case it will get downgraded. First ineligible exposure is MSME borrower account, which is having an aggregate exposure up to 25 crores as on 1st March 2020. So in such case, you have to go by 6th August MSME circular and not by this circular. Now let me give you an interesting case, a hypothetical case. It might happen that you have a MSME borrower account which was having an aggregate exposure up to 25 crores, and it has already availed a benefit under MSME circular in earlier circular, maybe 1st January 2019 circular. And now that MSME borrower account is having an aggregate exposure about 30 crores. So in that case, that account will become eligible under resolution framework. It might be a stray case, but that is very much possible that now your MSME borrower is exceeding 25 crores. So in that case, he becomes eligible. So just keep this thing in mind. Second one is that farm credit is not eligible under this scheme. So you have to go for master directions for natural calamity for restructuring a farm credit, not under this resolution framework. Loans to PACs and FSS are ineligible for onward lending arrangements. Exposure to lending institutions, exposure to central, state, and local government bodies, exposure to housing finance companies, all are ineligible. Banks' own staff loans are not eligible under this scheme. See, the earlier circulars, that is 23rd March, 17th April, and 23rd May circular, staff loans were eligible to avail the moratorium period. But here actually staff loans have been categorically made ineligible. So there the benefit of resettlement or restructuring is not possible for bank employees. Now, as far as eligible exposures are concerned, anything other than these ineligible 7 exposures are considered eligible exposure. So there the criteria is divided into 2 parts. First is personal loan. Second one is other than personal. Now, as far as personal loans are concerned, there are eligibility criteria which are specified. Firstly, it is applicable only to pandemic affected borrowers. So this is something which bank has to prove before you, that whether the personal loan availing borrower has been affected by pandemic or not. So that is something which bank has to prove, not you should prove to the bank whether it is affected or not. Second one is that bank has to have a board approved policy for implementation of this personal loan related resolution framework. The reference date for outstanding amount of debt for resolution will be 1st March 2020. Fourth condition is very crucial, that the account has to be under standard asset category and it should not be in default for more than 30 days as on 1st March 2020. In short, if an account is NPA or if an account is SMA1 or SMA2, that account is ineligible. So the cutoff date is 1st March 2020. Another one is that the borrower account is required to be standard account as on the date of invocation of resolution plan also. Now here its condition is only a standard account, not really SMA 012. So even a SMA 2 account is there as on date of invocation, it's fine. So on date of invocation, what is meant by date of invocation? That is the date on which both borrower and the lender will agree to proceed with the resolution plan. So that is the date of invocation, and the last date of invocation was supposed to be 31st December 2020. And resolution has to be implemented within 90 days from the end of from the date of that invocation. Now, what kind of resolution plan a bank can offer to the personal loan account holder is that one is that they can offer resettlement of payment, they can offer conversion of interest accrued or to be accrued into another credit facility. Maximum moratorium period can be given to the extent of 2 years, but again, this is something which is not supposed to be blanketly given. So bank has to have a reason to justify as to why that moratorium period is granted, and it has to be on case-to-case basis, not as a general term. And moratorium period, whenever it is granted, that will be immediately effective on upon the implementation of this resolution plan, and it will be always prospective and not retrospective. As far as resolution plan implementation is concerned, there are 3 conditions which have been specified and which are very interesting one, especially the second one. First one is normal, that all documentation should be completed. Second one is interesting because what it stipulates for the first time is that there has to be a change in terms and condition of the loans, which should be duly reflected in the books of the lender. To put it in simple terms, it means that the banker should ensure that the master data is also changed based on the restructured plan or resolution framework. So unless the master data is changed, that will not be called as implemented. So wherever the bank sees that a particular personal loan has been implemented as on a particular date, just verify as to what is the date when that master data was changed based on the revised terms and conditions of repayment. If that is after 31st December 2020, that is ineligible because the implementation date was supposed to be 31st December only. Borrower is not in default with lenders as per the revised term. That is a natural thing. And in case of any breach of conditions of implementation, normal NPA norms will be applicable. For other exposures, that is other than personal loan, again, that is divided into two types. First type is for single borrower, single lender exposures. The board approved policy will govern the implementation of this resolution. And in case of multiple lending institutions, then there is another condition that resolution plan is required to be confirmed at least by 75% in value terms by the lenders, or 60% and 60% in number by the lenders. And unless and until these many lending institutions are agreeing to invoke the plan, that is a resolution plan, and also the borrower is agreeing for that, then only it will be considered as invoked and not otherwise. For other exposures, the date of invocation was 31st December. Date of implementation is within 180 days from the date of invocation. So we have sufficient time till now. Moratorium period maximum is permitted is 2 years. Again, that has to be justified also. It is not blanket 2 years period. Additional sanction of facilities permitted. And for multiple lending institutions, the intercreditors agreement is required to be signed within 30 days from the date of invocation of that plan. Otherwise, the invocation will be considered as lapsed. Then one more condition is there that there is expert committee which is formulated, and the expert committee was supposed to define the financial parameters and sector specific range of parameters. And that was a kind of a, you can say, eligibility criteria for these other exposures. So unless and until these financial parameters are met, then only the resolution framework can be implemented by the bank and the benefit can be availed. The expert committee published the report on 7th September 2020. It gave a list of financial parameters and sector-wise parameters also. And there are two more conditions which RBI stipulated. One is that wherever the aggregate exposure is above 1,500 crores, then that proposal has to be weighted by expert committee. And in cases wherein the exposure is above 100 crores, then in that case, independent credit evaluation by independent credit rating agency will be required. So these two additional conditions are there for large borrower accounts. Asset classification and provisioning. RBI has given multiple regulatory norms related to that. So wherever any additional facility is sanctioned between invocation and implementation, that will be considered as standard asset. Once the account if in case of account where the implementation fails, that will be treated as co-borrower. So if other borrower accounts are NPA, that will be also treated as NPA. In case if the account slips into NPA category between invocation and implementation date, then it will be again upgraded to standard asset category once the implementation gets over based on the implementation guidelines which RBI has prescribed. And the retention of class of benefit is extended. So wherever this resolution framework is adopted, the account need not be downgraded. There are provisioning requirements which RBI has stipulated. So as and when the implementation occurs, at least 10% provision is required. But suppose the account has already slipped into NPA category, and let's presume that it is a substandard asset and 15% provision is done. Then the higher provision, which is 15%, has to be retained, even though you roll it back to standard asset category. But since on the date of implementation, the provision is on a higher side, you have to retain that provision. For other exposures, if the integrators agreement is signed within 30 days, the provision will be as on the date of implementation or 10%, whichever is higher. But if the signature happens after 30 days, then the bank is required to make at least 20% provision. As far as the reversal of provision is concerned, in case of personal loans, once 20% of the residual debts are repaid back, then in that case, 50% provision will get reversed. And once additional 10% is paid back, then the balance 50% provision will be also rolled back. For other exposures, like signatories to integrators agreement, it will be at par with personal loan as far as reversal is concerned. For non-signatories, it will be same, but IRAC norms will be prevalent over there because you are not under really resolution framework. Post-implementation performance is also required to be monitored. So for personal loan, normal IRAC norms are there, but for other exposure, there is a monitoring period which is defined. So monitoring period is the period between date of implementation and repayment of at least 10% of residual period, residual dates, subject to a minimum period of 1 year from the commencement of first installment or first principal or interest portion. Now, if there is a default during this monitoring period, then 30 days review period will be triggered. And in that 30 days review period, if the borrower is still in default at the end of the review period, in the sense, if the borrower is not able to recoup the default, that is nullify the default, then the account will be downgraded to NPA category. So it's not that the resolution framework provides a blanket kind of extension, but there is a monitoring period also, there is a review period also, which is quite stringent, because in the first 1 year, at least for first year, or maybe on a higher period also, provided if there is a staggered repayment, then it can be beyond 1 year also. That particular account holder can be in default only for 30 days. If he exceeds that particular 30 days period in default, then the account will turn into NPA. So it's a stringent provision which RBI stipulated over here. Disclosure is a normal one. There is a format which is prescribed for quarterly and annual financial disclosures. And every bank will report in credit reporting as restriction under COVID-19 package. So that tag will be always there in the CIBIL reporting of that particular borrower. So it's not a clean restructuring per se, because the tag will be there. So there is a possibility that there will be kind of credit rating issues which might happen in future. Now, besides this, we have a couple of more advanced related circulars. So I will just run through a couple of them. First one is 21st August 2020 circular that talks about ad hoc review, ad hoc facilities, short reviews and renewals of credit facilities. The one which we talked about earlier, wherein the original once the original due date of renewal lapses beyond 180 days, the account has to be marked as NPA. So RBI has just reiterated that point. Then we have 21st August 2020 circular, which talks about new definition of micro, small, and medium enterprises, and it is giving a clarification on that. So you can refer to that circular about understanding as to what is MSME as far as the RBI circulars are concerned. Then we have 14th September circular, which gives a cutoff date of 30th June or a target date of 30th June to the banks to adopt automation of IRAC norms within CBS system. So it is expecting that there should not be any manual intervention related to marking, classification, income recognition, and provisioning norms. This is something which is a kind of a reiteration which was earlier communicated by RBI in 2011 to the banks. And interestingly, in 2011, all the banks said that their process is automated. On a personal level, I'm a little skeptical about this second time cutoff date which has been given. Because the practical experience of most of us is that there is nothing like automation which really exists. So the CBS system softwares are very much capable of that. Only thing is that they are right now at least in the phase of auto identification, but ultimate marking is something discretionary with the branch head or maybe the appropriate level head. So as an auditor, wherever you are going, just make it a point that you have the report of accounts which otherwise would have been marked as NPA, but the bank has deferred to mark that account as NPA. So try to analyze as to what is the reason for non-marking of an account as NPA. Then we have 3rd September 2020 interim order of Supreme Court. So let me spend a few minutes on that, because I'm sure that most of you will be interested in discussing about that. Just one disclaimer from my side that when I'm discussing this 3rd September 2020 interim order, I'm just trying to express my own views. These views are not really of CA Institute or WRC or anyone. I'm expressing my views to just initiate a kind of academic discussion amongst us to revisit the accounting concepts actually, rather than I should say IRAC norms. So let me just give it a try about invoking our basics of accounting. But first, let me tell you what is the interim order. See, this 3rd September 2020 order is running into 7 pages. First 6 pages are a list of advocates who are representing various stakeholders for that writ petition. This was a writ petition, civil writ petition in Supreme Court, numbered 825 by 2020 by one Mr. Gajendra Sharma. And the Supreme Court has given a one-liner order, that 7th page, by saying that the accounts which were not declared as NPA till 31st August 2020 shall not be declared as NPA till further orders. A plain reading of this particular line may can be interpreted that there will not be any NPA after 31st August 2020 till 31st March 2021. Banks have adopted various practices related to that. I'm not getting into that. Neither I am getting into the part about the powers of Reserve Bank of India, about giving a relaxation about NPA norms or changing the NPA norms. Frankly speaking, Section 35, 35A and 36 of BR Act empowers only RBI to give directions to the bank. So this is one thing which I just wanted to know. But let me go a little beyond that. See, as far as NPA classification, provisioning, income recognition norms are concerned, they are related to first basic and fundamental accounting principle, which all of us have learned in maybe 11th or 12th standard, about bad debts and provision on bad debts. So let me talk a little about that, even though it's too primary as far as all CAs are concerned, but let me just revisit that. See, all of us have learned that whenever there is a receivable is there for any entity or any person, and if the recoverability is endangered, then we say that it is a bad debt or it is a likely bad debt, to be specific. Now, in case of likely bad debts, what we do is we make a provision against that, which is nothing but called as BDDR. Now, this NPA is nothing but a bad loan for a bank. Only thing is that to avoid a subjectivity which was in existence till 92-93, wherein health code system was there, where there was a complete discretion available with the auditors to decide about whether a particular whether a particular account can be called as NPA or not, and how much provision has to be made. So that discretion was there, and naturally the subjectivity was also there. So the IRAC norms, when they came into play, it was basically with the intent that wherever the subjectivity is there, that was removed. So there were norms which were defined as to how to identify account as performing and non-performing. It's nothing but a distinguishing factor between a good loan and a bad loan. Now, wherever there are bad advances are there or bad loans are there, there was a requirement of making a provision. So the minimum required provisions were spelled out in that IRAC circulars. So what we have today is identification process of good loan and bad loan. Second is that we have a criteria about how to make a provision, which is a minimum provision, not really a prudential provision, because prudential provision is something more than minimum provision. Whatever is below minimum provision, that cannot be called as prudential provision, but that is ad hoc provision. Now, having said that, I will also like to invite your attention to Section 15 of BR Act. Section 15 of BR Act empowers the auditor, since it has been stated over there that as per Section 15 of BR Act, the provision against the bad loan has to be made to the satisfaction of the auditor. Now, that's where the real that's where the real point is. That on one hand, Supreme Court is saying that the accounts should not be declared as NPA, which were PA as on 31st August. On the other hand, we have Section 15, and we have onerous responsibility as an auditor to say that whether the true and fair view has been is there in balance sheet and P&L account or not. Now, whenever I'm I want to express a true and fair view, the minimum requirement is that wherever there is a possibility of losses there in terms of bad loan, I need to make adequate provision. So the prudent way will be that even if the account is not really marked as NPA or considered as NPA to be more liberal by the bank, few things one has to think over. Firstly, if such accounts was otherwise would have been marked as NPA, it will be always essential that the adequate provision has to be made. It will ensure that your profit, in the sense bank's profit, will take a hit of that provision. So true balance of profit and loss account will be there. Second thing is that since adequate provision is there, my balance sheet will be also true and fair view, will give a true and fair view. But it will come with an additional point that in case if such treatment is adopted by the bank, then that has to be properly disclosed in notes on accounts by the bank. And then as an auditor, it will be always advisable to draw attention over there by way of emphasis of matter. But in case, let's presume that a particular bank is not really disclosing anything, then naturally you can give it under other matters para. because then you have to disclose those facts. But suppose a bank doesn't do anything, they don't disclose, they don't make any provision, then my personal view is that you should opt for or you should think of modifying the report, because then I don't think that the financials will be really depicting the true and fair view. The reason I already told you about what is bad loan and the criteria for that. So again, this is my personal view. Since this Supreme Court question was asked me as a first question over here, I thought that I should be very elaborate and maybe little more academic oriented than to just say that since Supreme Court judgment is there, we should not do anything. That is something which is not really prudent as far as an auditor is concerned, because we need to express an independent view. One more thing is that the guidance note will get published at any point of time. So I will appeal to all of you to refer to the guidance note also. Take a clue from the views and guidance which is given in the guidance note, especially about Supreme Court judgment and naturally for other cases also. So if you have any queries, you can post. I hope that I try to clarify most of the things about Supreme Court judgment. And since time is there, I will take up couple of important aspects beyond this. We'll talk about projects under implementation in brief. We discussed this initially, but let me be a little elaborate. See, project loan is any term loan which has been extended for the purpose of setting up of an economic venture. And every bank is required to spell out the date of completion and date of commencement of commercial operation whenever the such term loan is sanctioned. Now, there are two types of project loans are there, and there are certain guidelines which are given related to DCCO and restructuring of project loans. So firstly, I'm just reiterating that wherever the DCCO is not met, then in that case, the account turns into NPA. So all the conditions which we are talking now are over and above normal IRAC norms. Now, there is a relaxation given that in case of a project loan, if there is a rise in cost, excluding cost overruns, maybe because of technology advancement, or it might be that the original project outlay has increased beyond 25%. And if this happens before commencement of commercial operation, then the bank can again reassess the viability of the new outlay, and they can do a re-rating and they can restructure the entire advance. They can also give additional funding. So this will not be considered as restructuring, and they can retain the class of asset. If these conditions are not met, naturally the restructuring is possible then, but it will be coupled with downgrading. The next slide is about giving a idea about how the deferment of DCCO is possible. So wherever a mere application from borrower is there, then the revision in DCCO is permitted. So for infrastructure, 2 years deferment is possible. For non-infrastructure project loans, 1 year from original DCCO extension is possible. If there is a court case going on, then for infrastructure loan, it can be 2 + 2 4 years extension. If any other reason is there, typically natural calamity or force majeure, as someone was asking earlier, then additional 1 year is there. So 2 years for infrastructure is basic extension, which is permitted purely on the basis of borrower's requirement or borrower's request. It need not be backed by any reason. For non-infra, it is 1 year, and for other reasons, additional 1 year or 2 year is granted. And once you extend the DCCO, to that extent, to the extent of that extension, you will have to extend the repayment schedule also. So if that is that is done, then that will not be considered as restructuring, and the retention of class benefit is available. One change which has occurred by way of 7th February 2020 circular is that earlier DCCO extension was not permitted for CRE. So now even for CRE, there is extension period of 1 year which is granted without downgrading of the asset. So that is a kind of a relaxation given for commercial real estate project loans. Another important point is in case of change of ownership, additional 2 years extension is possible. So suppose you are having an infra related project loan. Initial 2 years are possible by way of mere application. Additional 2 years might be possible because of court case, but additional 2 years will be possible even for change of ownership. So in all, you can get extension period of 6 years. So that's how DCCO can be extended for a maximum period of 6 years in all. Beyond that, naturally, the DCCO cannot be extended. And if the commercial operation doesn't start, as I earlier stated, the account will be required to be marked as NPA. Financing for cost overrun is also permitted, wherein standby credit facilities can be given and the cost overruns can be accommodated. and the cost overrun has to be within 10% of the original cost. So it's not that whatever is cost overrun that can be financed. It can be disbursed only in case of cost overruns, not to regularize the original account. So it is only for a specific purpose. Before we come to now income recognition norm, let me just look at queries which are raised. Auditors necessarily to follow the guidance by ICAI subject to Supreme Court order, which is also binding. I will express a little different view. As far as auditors are concerned, we are bound by ICAI regulations, which are in the form of standards and which are in the form of guidance notes. Supreme Court order is more binding on those who are applicants, so maybe on the banks. That's the maximum thing which I can say. Supreme Court order was not addressed to the auditors at per se. So we need to verify as to how the bank has treated that Supreme Court order. And based on that, we have to take a judgment. But basically, we should never forget that ultimately we want to express an opinion about true and fairness of the accounts. So that's why I give an example of bad loans, criteria of bad loans, which is there in IRAC norms. Section 15, which empowers the auditor to make a provision to his satisfaction. And that's a very crucial thing which is available with the auditor. So it has nothing to do with Supreme Court order in any way. Even if the Supreme Court order is not there, but if the auditor is of the opinion that some additional provision is required over and above the IRAC norms, that was very much permissible for the auditor to insist upon. So that condition prevails. If NRI opens an account with the bank and does not disclose his or her status as a resident to the bank, how bank and auditors can come to know or verify any such cases? See, in that case, neither the auditor nor the banker is really required to know. But your question starts with that the NRI opens an account. So I presume that the NRI is posing before the bank as a resident. So if normal KYC compliance is done by that particular account holder, he says that he's a resident in the account opening form, because peculiarly in most of the banks, they have a column whether you're a resident or non-resident. So he declares falsely, then banker is not at fault, and auditor is anyway not at fault. So if there are circumstantial evidences are there before you, which proves that is a NRI, then only banker or auditor can be at fault. Otherwise, you don't even have to verify the residential status of anyone. So income recognition norms, just to quickly run through. For NP accounts, income has to be recognized on the realization basis. And whenever an account is marked as non-performing, the unrealized interest, which is there in the form of maybe unrealized fees, interest, commission, related to earlier period, that has to be reversed, and as and when it is recovered, you have to account for as a income. In case of project loan, funding of interest in case of NPAs is recognized in, as income as and when it is received. So it has to be 100% provided for. Wherever you convert your interest due into unlisted equity or any other instrument, income will be recognized. Income recognized will be fully provided for. So in short, these are the concepts related to FITL. Only exception is that suppose your interest due is converted into a listed security, then in that case, the market value of that security will be considered, and to that extent, income will be eligible to be recognized. Order of recovery in case of NP accounts, typically the order is firstly unrealized expense, then unrealized interest, and then principal outstanding. But looking at practical point of view, or rather technical point of view, the discretion is available with the banker. So you need to refer to the bank's policy as to what is the order of recovery, and have to verify that whether the same accounting policy is adopted in actual accounting or not. Classification norms have remained same, so there is no change in DA1, DA2, DA3 category. Even percentages of provision has remained same. So I'm not really getting deeper into that. Definition of secured loan we already discussed. Doubtful asset category provisioning requirement is 100% on unsecured portion. For secured portion for DA1 it is 25, for DA2 it is 40%. Intangible security is something which you need to pay attention to. That intangible security will be considered only if it is backed by legally enforceable and recoverable rights over the collection, and rest all intangibles like trademarks, rights, licenses, they will be considered as unsecured. They cannot be really factored into a secured portion. Country-wise risk has also remained same. provision under special circumstances. I would just like to draw your attention to advances which are guaranteed by ECGC or CGTSI, CGT MSME. So in that case, provision in case of NP account has to be made only out of the balance which is in excess of the amount which is guaranteed by the corporations, because since these corporations are guaranteeing the amount, to that extent provision is not required. Whatever is above that, you have to make a provision. Takeout finance also, there is no change in the rules. It has remained same. Export project finance also is same. Post shipment supplier credit also same. Just to give again one highlight about export project finance, it's a typically a case might arise that suppose there is an Indian exporter who has exported certain goods to say some country, and in that country the importer is now not able to make a remittance to India because of some regulatory restrictions which have been imposed by the regulator of that country. Then in that case, the exporter of India can open an account in that country and he can have the amount received in this particular account. If that is demonstrated, then there is a 1 year extension period which has been granted, bring back that amount to India, and till that time you can keep that account under performing asset category, even though the amount is received later on. Restructuring of advances, practically it can be done for any type of account. So there is no bar on which account can be restructured. Only bar is that restructuring has to be prospectively done, not retrospectively. Restructuring has to be with consent of customer, not a suo motu activity. Financial viability is required to be established. Borrowers who are indulging in frauds and falsification, in that case, such accounts are eligible for that. Restructuring can be done at any stage. It can be before commencement of commercial operation, after that, when the account is PA, when the account is NPA. So at any stage, a bank is permitted to do a restructuring. But whenever a restructuring is done, standard asset will turn into a substandard asset. NPA account will further slip down further. And in case of any additional finance which is given, for 1 year it will be treated as standard, and then it will be co-borrower. All these restructured accounts will be eligible for upgradation. Satisfactory, if the satisfactory performance is shown by the accounts which are restructured, the criteria is also given that in next 1 year period, if there is no overdue at the end of the period, and if the account was never out of order for more than 90 days, or if the account was never overdue in case of term loan beyond 90 days, in that 1 year period, the account can be upgraded to standard asset category. Provisioning requirement, whenever a account is restructured, then there is additional provision which has to be made in the form of sacrifice. Sacrifice calculation is based on the DCF method, wherein the original cash flow is compared with the revised cash flow of repayment, and you have to calculate the present value based on DCF calculation using a discounting factor of interest which is applicable for that particular borrower account. And in case of any adverse DCF present value calculation happens, that differential, that is adverse differential, is considered as sacrifice. So that sacrifice calculation, once it is done, that has to be provided for, with one relaxation which RBI has given, that for loan exposures which are below 1 crore, in that case, you can presume that sacrifice is at 5%, and you can just notionally provide the sacrifice. SRT, that is special regulatory treatment, is abolished from 1st April 2015, except for change of DCCO, which is still permitted, as we discussed earlier. So whenever a restructuring happens, except in cases which we discussed earlier, in that case, the account has to be downgraded. A few RBI circulars which have been abolished, even though I have retained that in this particular presentation, is 30th January circular, which was having SDR, S4A and various schemes which are there. So that has been abolished. 12th February 2018 circular was issued by RBI in abolition of this January 14 circular. But even that circular is now suspended because of Supreme Court stay order. And in the replacement to that, June 19 circular has been issued. So in subsequent slides, I have kept all these original circulars intact, because you might be having a case wherein maybe S4A or other circulars might have been adopted. So if you happen to verify such accounts, you can just run through this presentation. I will ensure that the presentation reaches to you this study circle. I'll just touch upon few important aspects about June 19th circular. June 19th circular, searched upon the SMA classification, that is SMA 0, SMA 1, SMA 2 classification for term loans based on number of days overdue criteria. For CCOD accounts, it defines only SME1, SME2 category. And what it mandates the bank is that for accounts wherein the exposure is above 5 crores, CRILC reporting is mandatory based on that SME criteria. So whenever you are doing audit, you don't have to only verify whether it is PA, NPA. You have to also verify whether the SME classification is correctly identified by the system or not. And accordingly, you have to also verify that whether the CRILC reporting is happening or not. One more thing is that similar to CIBIL, CRILC report extraction is possible for the bank. So suppose the bank is giving a loan wherein the total exposure is already above 5 crores, you can also ask the bank as to whether they are verifying the CRILC status of that borrower account or not, because that is a kind of additional credit information which the particular bank can seek. I will not go into detail because we are, I think, almost at the end of the time. Just one more point I wanted to just invite your attention is about guidelines on sale of financial assets. So any one of you, if you happen to get a branch which is an asset recovery branch, you might come across a case wherein the NPA accounts are sold to asset reconstruction companies. So in that case, certain criteria are defined and the accounting treatments are defined. But maybe will be maybe one or two of us might be getting such branches. So I won't go into detail into that. But if you want to you can always refer to these slides as a quick reference material. And I will just come to a few important points. I will just take 1 or 2 minutes for that. Firstly, as an auditor, just do a periodic checking of master data in the CBS. Verify that whether the parameterization of CBS is really adopted by the bank based on RBI circular, especially the RBI circulars which are being getting issued. It's becoming day by day difficult to get it adopted and implemented in the CBS system. So just pay attention to that. Accounts which are upgraded during the year, pay utmost attention to that, and also ensure that the date of NPA of current year and prior year of the existing NPA is continued as it is and not changed from 1 year to another year. Authenticity and regularity of stock statement is something which you need to verify, and there are early warning signal systems which have been asked in LFAR as to whether the bank is making use of that or not. So you can just go through the early warning signal circular of Reserve Bank of India. It gives a detailed 42 checkpoints about early warning signals. Stock statement is one of the crucial points which have been specified over there. And last but not the least, I will just like to harp upon everything of the accounts. Eco Survey 2021, which was recently published in the last month, it is giving a very critical comment, or to be very vocal, very nasty comments about bankers and the auditors with reference to everything of the account. Just go through that Eco Survey. Rather than I'm quoting that Eco Survey, I will like you to go through that particular Eco Survey, especially comment about everything of the account. Once you read that, actually, you will never tend to forget everything of account and reporting about that. And last one is that as far as MOCs, main audit report, and LFARs are concerned, all these three things should be in sync with each other, and none of them is replacement to others. So suppose you have MOCs suggested in main audit report or LFAR, but you haven't giving the MOC, it's of no use. So all these three things are independent to each other, but you can give an elaboration of MOC in your LFAR. So that is something which you can always do. So this was all from my side. If there are any questions, we can take it up. Let me just look at the chat box, and we'll just take up the question. Is there any limit for initiating the restructuring process? See, restructuring process can be invoked at any point of time. For COVID-19 package, that is 6 August circular, they have given a limitation about invocation and implementation. So invocation was up to 31st December 2020. Date of invocation will be the date when lender and borrower both are agreeing for going for restructuring. And implementation for personal loan, it was 90 days period which is granted, and for other than personal loan, the 180 days period is granted. And normal restructuring can happen at any point of time. There is no bar on that.